Greetings. This is Chuck Dunning, and I welcome you to this video essay, Rosicrucianism and the Knight Rose Croix of Freemasonry. The views expressed here are my own, unless noted otherwise. In fact, the narrative is taken nearly verbatim from parts of the second chapter of my book, A Rose Croix Oratory. By the way, the pronunciation Rosicrucian is most common among brethren here in the USA, so that is what I'm using instead of the French Rosicrucian, which is arguably more proper. The purpose of this presentation is to show that there are plenty of symbolic and philosophical connections between Rosicrucianism and the 18th degree of the Scottish Rite, Knight Rose Croix. In doing so, I trust that it will become apparent that the two traditions are at least compatible with each other. And beyond that, I suggest the strong possibility that the origins and ongoing development of this degree have been knowingly inspired by the Rosicrucian movement. Between 1614 and 1616, three documents were published that started a firestorm of interest in the fraternity they spoke of, namely the Fraternity or Order of the Rosy Cross, or simply the Rosicrucians. While the flurry had faded by the end of the 17th century, the so-called manifestos and derivative works continued to attract persons sincerely interested in the more recondite aspects of science and spirituality. In the middle of the 18th century, many of those people were Freemasons who felt moved to work Rosicrucian themes into their degree systems. So it is that Mackintosh refers to this period as being the Masonic phase of Rosicrucian history. With regard to the creation of actual organizations, this renewal of Rosicrucian symbolism was highly active and produced long-lasting effects. There had been rumors of Rosicrucian organizations existing ever since the publication of the first Rosicrucian source text, the Fama Fraternitatis, in 1614. Yet, during a 1761 anti-Masonic purge in Prague, a document of rituals and statutes emerged as the first solid evidence of a functional Rosicrucian society, the Black Rose. Christopher Mackintosh calculated that the order would have been in existence as early as 1757. The order's rituals and teachings were significantly alchemical in nature and apparently reflected the work of Hermann Fichtold, who was influential on a later order that was also concerned with alchemy, the Golden and Rosy Cross, which was operational by 1777. The legacy of the Golden and Rosy Cross would later prove influential on the Masonic Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, founded in 1865, and the non-Masonic Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, begun in 1887, with its inner order of the Red Rose and Golden Cross. The main point here is that the mid to late 1700s produced a number of Masonic degrees or orders making use of the Rose Cross symbol in an esoteric Christian initiatic rite. As another noteworthy example, in 1763, the Christian esotericist Jean-Baptiste Willermoz founded the Knights of the Black Eagle and Rose Cross. If the manifestos and their early defenders were the foundation of the Rosicrucian historical edifice, then this era of Masonic revival was certainly when numerous walls, floors, and rooms were constructed. Many have since crumbled and fallen, while others have been perpetuated into the present day. In any case, within Freemasonry, the symbol of the rose and cross found a lasting home and continuing generations willing to draw inspiration from it. In this crucial period of the mid-1700s, Etienne Morin created the Order of the Royal Secret in 1761, in which the 18th degree was listed as, quote, Knights of the White Eagle or Pelican, known by the name of Perfect Mason or Knight of the Rose Cross, end quote. In 1801, the degrees of Morin's order were included in a new system of 33 degrees that are still practiced under the banner of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. Today, the 18th degree is most commonly known simply as Knight Rosicrucian, although it carries other titles connecting it with earlier versions such as Sovereign Prince Rosicrucian of Eredom, Perfect Prince de HRDM, Knight of the White Eagle or Pelican, and Knight of the Eagle and Pelican. In the following paragraphs, we consider how the degree's symbolism and teachings have evolved to more fully intertwine with common elements of Rosicrucianism. Early versions of the 18th degree overtly offer little more than the review of common Christian teachings on theology, damnation versus salvation, and the life, messages, and spiritual role of Jesus Christ. These points are embellished with the symbolism of temple destruction and rebuilding that is central to Scottish Rite Freemasonry, with special emphasis on the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and love or charity that are initially taught in many versions of the first degree, entered apprentice. There is nothing in the first versions of the Knight Rosicrucian degree that explicitly references the kinds of things found in esoteric Christianity, such as Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Gnosticism, or alchemy. More than one Masonic scholar has therefore concluded that there was never anything genuinely Rosicrucian about the Rosicrucian degree. Other scholars, including McIntosh and Churton, have reasoned that there are indeed significant commonalities and enough to regard the degree as a recognizable expression of the Rosicrucian spirit. However, seeing the commonalities requires interpretations of the degree's symbolism that are not offered by the degree itself, and such interpretation is the right of every Freemason, even a duty. To that end, you are encouraged to consult published versions of the rituals as you consider the following points. The Rose Cross. The authors of our rituals were well aware of the background of this image and must have known it would be regarded as at least a symbolic connection with the movement started by the Fama Fraternitatis. Perhaps more telling than the lack of any admission to an intentional connection through this symbol is the lack of any disclaimer. Had they not wanted the connection to be made, they could have at least said so, but they did not. At the very least, regarding the Rosicrucian degree as Rosicrucian is left an option. The prominence of the colors black, white, and red. These colors are also central to alchemy, where they actually name the three most universally referenced phases of the great work, nigredo, albedo, and rubedo, the blackening, the whitening, and the reddening. Gold also fits into this sequence, since it is typically connected and sometimes even equated with red. One could further argue that the sequence of events of the degree ritual parallels these phases. The cubic stone, sweating blood and water. This is a combination of widely known Christian imagery based on biblical references to Jesus as the chief cornerstone of the church, his perspiring blood in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the water that gushed from the spear wound in his side as he hung on the cross. This imagery also speaks directly to alchemists, where the cubic stone signifies the primal material with which one works, as well as the work's goal, the philosopher's stone. The blood and water can likewise be regarded as representations of the fundamental solar and lunar elements within the stone, elements that many alchemical texts say must be properly extracted and reintegrated to accomplish the great work. The eagle. The eagle has two traditional meanings in ordinary Christianity that have further depths among esoteric Christians. First, because the eagle is a sharp-eyed bird that freely soars closer to the heavens, it represents Christians who can see the light, who have been baptized and born again, freed from the weight of their sins, and are thus closer to heaven. The eagle has a somewhat resonant meaning in alchemy, where it represents essences that have been evaporated or sublimed from a substance. It is thus generally symbolic of the spirit that animates matter. It is therefore also sometimes connected with the phoenix, which rises reborn from its flaming death. Second, the eagle is commonly associated with St. John the Evangelist and his gospel. Of the four canonical gospels, John's is the one that most addresses the heavenly or divine aspects of Jesus Christ. This common exoteric association with the Gospel of John is also meaningful among esoteric Christians. The first chapter addresses the divinity of Jesus as the Logos, a term that was already very familiar to Greek philosophers for many centuries before the writing of that Gospel. Among other meanings, it was the rational animating aspect of the divine, upon which each thing in creation is dependent for its existence. This understanding of the Logos fits well with that of the Gospel of John, as does Philo of Alexandria's concept of the Logos as being the firstborn of God. The Gospel of John also speaks most clearly of Jesus' intention that his followers know the same unity with God that he knows, an idea that sometimes seems hidden in plain sight to many mainstream Christians. Esoteric Christians commonly regard these statements as a mandate for seeking mystical realization, or gnosis, a kind of liberation from illusion that is aptly represented by the high-flying eagle or reborn phoenix. The pelican feeding its chicks with blood from its own breast. This is an ancient portrayal of salvation and spiritual nourishment provided to the faithful through Jesus' self-sacrifice. But alchemists also recognize it as depicting a kind of distillation vessel called a retort. In the great work, it facilitates the refinement, condensing, and multiplication of the philosopher's stone so that it can then be used in the transformation of other things. Psychospiritually speaking, it signifies the stage of development in which one is preparing to apply their spiritual essence for the benefit of others, which nicely parallels the standard religious symbolism of the pelican feeding its young. The required meeting on Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday is the day in the liturgical calendar on which Christians venerate the Last Supper, when Jesus taught his disciples the sacrament with bread and wine to remember the sacrifice of his body and blood. The word Maundy literally means mandatory, relating to Jesus' new commandment to love as he loved. On the Rosicrucian side, Maundy Thursday is one candidate for the mysterious Day C mentioned in the Fama, on which all Rosicrucian initiates are expected to spiritually commune in the house of the Holy Spirit, or report the reason for their absence. According to an old statute for Masons of the Rose-Croix degree, if one is alone on this day, then it is imperative to meet, quote, other knights in the Spirit, end quote. Themes of personal transformation and social reformation. The presence of these themes in Rosicrucian source texts is well established. Furthermore, their presence throughout Freemasonry is beyond dispute. This degree presents those themes in its allegorical journey from darkness to light, along the way encouraging members to contemplate the disposition of their souls, to practice the virtues of faith, hope, and charity, and to emulate Jesus Christ in loving others. Examination of these 7 elements shows that there are significant symbolic intersections and that a Knight Rose-Croix and an aspiring Rosicrucian could easily be one and the same. From the first appearance of this degree, the congruence would have been apparent to anyone well versed with Rosicrucianism and alchemical or esoteric Christian interpretations of the degree's symbolism. This perspective is further punctuated by the possibility that the degree was first written by Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, a known esotericist and student of the theurgist Martinus de Pasquale. Beginning with revisions made to the ritual in 1861, even more commonalities with Rosicrucianism were included. The current ritual of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction was put in use within the first decade of the 21st century. Although the ritual still does not directly address Rosicrucianism, it and its official supporting literature reveal even more aspects connecting it with the movement. For example, in the Scottish Rite Ritual Monitor and Guide, the official guidebook for the degrees of the Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction, it is noted, quote, "This degree both reveals and conceals one of the great secrets of alchemy," end quote. The statement is followed by an explanation of the difference between practical alchemy and spiritual alchemy. It is then asserted that the latter type is initiatic and that its practitioners have sought to transform themselves, which is clarified as the work of this degree. Thus, this textbook explanation of the Rose-Croix degree firmly connects it with psycho-spiritual alchemy and thereby echoes the founding documents of the Rosicrucian movement. Intertwining with the alchemical language are references to nature that mirror those found in the Rosicrucian manifestos. For example, the Rose-Croix lecture explains one esoteric meaning of the acronym INRI as Igne Natura Renovatur Integra. All of nature is renovated by fire. Further consideration of INRI includes this statement, quote, "We apply reason to the book of nature and find a great truth written in the letters of light. There is a living God. The great law that governs the universe is harmony, the will of the Almighty God, always acting as the expression of his infinite love." Arriving at this result by applying reason to the decipherment on the great pages of the Book of Nature, we read the sacred initials thus, and I stop the quote there to preserve the secrecy of the ritual. For comparison, in the Confessio Fraternitatis, the second of the Rosicrucian source texts, we find, quote, "The book of nature is opened wide before the eyes of all, though few can either read or understand it," end quote. Also consider the Fama Fraternitatis speaking of the importance of probing, quote, "all faculties, sciences, and arts, and all of nature in order to determine certain infallible axioms," end quote. The degree lecture additionally contains references to some of the same philosophers and sages lauded by the Fama Fraternitatis, including an extensive examination of the Tetractys of the Greek philosopher Pythagoras. That examination makes a connection with Kabbalah, which is also mentioned in the Fama. Furthermore, the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below, as below, so above, is dramatically highlighted in the ritual in a way that must remain privy to those who have received the initiation. In conclusion, Rosicrucianism is rooted in the three so-called manifestos of the 17th century. In the 18th century, the movement extended a branch into Freemasonry through a number of different rites and degrees that incorporated Rosicrucian symbolism, themes, and values. One of those degrees, Knight Rose-Croix, has continued to evolve so that today it even more obviously reveals its resonance with Rosicrucianism. It is therefore perfectly reasonable in my mind to conclude that anyone who receives the 18th degree deeply contemplates its ritual, symbols, and teachings, and actively applies the light gained therefrom, may rightly be regarded as walking a genuine Rosicrucian path. Thank you for joining me in taking a closer look at the symbolic connections between Rosicrucianism and the Knight Rose Croix degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite.